Okay, so we are doing 3.2 adding and subtracting rational numbers. I think again you're going to find this may appear somewhat like it's review. So let's start off with something that I feel you've for sure seen before. Basically, if we were looking at rational numbers, we talked about are positives, negatives, whole numbers, decimals, repeating decimals, fractions, all of that stuff, and we're just adding and subtracting them. So what is negative 4 plus 8? Yeah, it's just positive 4, and then they also want you to familiarize yourselves with showing this or demonstrating this on a number line. So that's the only part that I'm wondering if, I don't know if you've done that before or if you know how to demonstrate this, but if we were starting at negative 1, 2, 3, 4, we'd have this on a number line, and that would be our starting point. And if we're adding 8 to it, 1, 2, 3, 4, I could even go all the way to 5, but basically that would mean on the number line we would be moving from here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that's where we would end up, and that's how we would get our answer or our response of 4 here. Good? So sometimes there's questions with the number line, just so you're familiar with how you would demonstrate or show that. We should probably have an arrow that indicates it's going in that direction, but that's basically how we would come up with this. And then if, for example, we had something like, let's say 5 plus negative 7. What's 5 plus negative 7? Yeah. Is it clear? Okay, negative 2. Everybody good with that? This feels like review? You've done this before? Okay, and that's why I figured it might be a nice quick lesson, but it's good to have some review because it's been a while, and I don't know how last year ended off for you with the switching to online and all of that stuff. So if we have negative 2 minus negative 3, can somebody tell me what's unique or different about this or what I would do with this? Yep. Add them and make it negative. So if you see minus a negative, it's the same thing as saying that it's a plus sign, right? So what is negative 2 plus 3? Positive 1. Everybody good with that? Okay. And then let's say, for example, so that's fine when we're dealing with integers. I'm just going to repeat some of the vocabulary because that you may not be quite so familiar with. But when we have positive and negative whole numbers, we're dealing with integers. Let's say we have something like 2.4 plus 3.7. Take a minute to figure out what you would get when you add these two together. If you're not able to do it in your head, quickly write it down to be able to. In fact, I would like you to write it down in order to come up with this, but what would you get precisely if you are adding or putting these two values together? Anybody want to share what they got? Sure, Claire? 6.1, everybody okay with that? Okay, and if these ones are both positive, so you're basically, if you find it easier, you can line them up like this, where you're simply adding them, and you'd keep the decimal there. We know that when we add those together, we would get this. And then 3, 4, 5, 6, you can see where that is coming from, right? If you're looking to see how you would work your way through it, that's how we would work our way through it. And then let's say we have something like 4.42 plus negative 2.71 equals. So there's actually a few different strategies or methods we could use. If we have plus and then minus, I can ignore something in there. What can I ignore? Snoop? We can ignore the plus sign. Does that make sense to everybody? So then we could take a look at this and say, okay, so this is like saying 4.42 minus 2.71. So I'm using the same setup as I did in the last one. And sometimes setting it up vertically, I believe that's how you learned it in elementary school. Is that true? That's probably the first time you learned about this, right? And then you reviewed it again last year. But we like to line up the decimals, line up the number places properly, and then it makes it a little easier and a little more organized for us to be able to work with. And then we just work our way through this. So we go through the first row here, 2 minus 1, and we're going to get the 1 there. And then what happens here, if I have the 4 minus 7, just as review or to brush up, what do? I can't do 4 minus 7, so what should I do? Yeah, we get it from the 4, so what do I end up getting there? Yeah, 14 minus 7, so we end up with a 7 there. Everybody good with that? And this feels like review. And then over here, we're left with 3 minus 2. So when we go to look at this, even if we hadn't done the work in green there, do you see by looking at the values that we started with that, could you look at that and be able to tell if the answer was going to be positive or negative? It's going to be positive because the positive value, the 4.42, is greater than the negative 2.71. Does that make sense? Or another way to look at it is the distance away from the 0 on the number line of this is a larger value than the negative distance is. That's how we know it's going to end up being a positive overall answer. So it makes sense that this would be positive 1.71. So far, so good? Okay, each time there's something a little bit different that's added in. So let's say we have negative 3.2 plus negative 1.4, and we want to figure out what the final answer is. Go ahead and take a second to work through that. Or you want to go through it together? You don't have to do it this way, but I want to get you thinking in these ways. If we look at this, if I have a negative and I'm adding more negatives to it, is my answer going to be positive or negative? I'm only dealing with negative values. So do you see off the bat, I already know that the answer is going to be negative. So I can sort of move that to the side and ignore it. And then what could I do with the 3.2 and the 1.4? We could just add them. 3.2 plus 1.4. So adding them because we're just trying to figure out that value, and we know the value in the end is going to be negative. So what do we get when we put those together? 4.6. So do you see the answer here would be negative 4.6? Everybody good with that? So with this stuff, just to be clear, we would not be using calculators. We would be doing it this way, by hand, the way that we have been. And let's take a look at 5.3 plus negative 7.2. Is my answer going to be positive or negative? The answer is going to be negative. Everybody good with how we are figuring that out? We are looking at the 5.3, that's positive. And when I look at the 7.2, which is a greater value, that one's negative. So that's how I know the negative is going to win. Oh, I don't like the sound of that. The negative's going to win. It's going to be negative in this case. And then to sort of take a shortcut or a smart way for us to look at this, what could I do with those values, the 7.2 and the 5.3? Yeah. Good. Does everybody see we could just find the difference between these two? So difference meaning subtraction. So we could do 7.2 and 5.3, and we could subtract them, and we know that that difference would be negative in the end. And what's a good way for me to subtract? So I can't do 2 minus 3. I'm going to have to borrow again. Everybody good with that, and it makes sense? So then I would borrow from the 7. That leaves a 6. So I'd have 12 minus 3. So we would get 9. I keep the decimal lined up vertically. And then 6 minus 5. So in the end, my answer would be negative 1.9. How are we feeling with that? Good? Well, that's all, folks. you are doing for this part numbers 1, 4, oh gosh, what is happening here? 6 and 7, you're going to do all of them. And, pardon?